Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Ontario, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Ontario, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened to me when I was 29 years old. During a winter, I still refused to drive through northern Ontario alone. I was a delivery supervisor for a regional freight company, the kind of job that keeps you on lonely highways at odd hours. My goal was simple: finish my route early, make it back home before the storm hit, and forget the week ever happened. I've always hated isolation. Silence makes my thoughts too loud. That night, snow fell in heavy sheets, swallowing the road ahead until the world felt reduced to my headlights and the white blur beyond them. My GPS rerouted me off the main highway onto a narrow 2-lane road I didn't recognize. The town name flickered on the screen briefly before vanishing. No signal, no updates. At first, I wasn't scared, just irritated. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Every few kilometers, there was a stop sign. No intersections, no side roads, just stop signs. Standing alone in the snow, I slowed at the next sign, my foot hovering over the brake, logic fighting instinct. Stopping made no sense, but blowing through it felt wrong, like ignoring a warning meant specifically for me. I stopped. The moment my tires settled, the radio crackled to life. Static first, then a low voice whispering something I couldn't fully understand. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't urgent. It sounded tired. I turned the radio off, heart racing, and drove on. The forest closed tighter around the road, trees leaning inward like they were listening. Snow muted everything, making the world feel padded, unreal. That's when I saw the lights. A small town ahead, yellow windows glowing warmly through the storm. Relief washed over me so hard I laughed out loud. I told myself this was good. Shelter, people, coffee, maybe directions. But as I passed the first building, I noticed something deeply wrong. The windows were lit, but there were no cars, no footprints, no smoke from chimneys. And every building faced the road, like it had been built only to watch who passed through. I parked near what looked like the town's main street and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit me instantly, sharp enough to steal my breath. The silence was worse. No wind, no distant engines, not even the sound of snow crunching, like the ground itself was swallowing noise. I walked up to the nearest building, a diner with a flickering open sign. Through the window, I could see tables set neatly, coffee cups upside down, chairs pushed in like someone had just finished cleaning. I knocked on the glass. Nothing. That's when I noticed the reflections. The windows didn't reflect me correctly. My movements lagged, delayed by half a second, like I was watching myself through thick water. When I raised my hand, the reflection hesitated before copying me. Panic crawled up my spine. I backed away, slipping on the snow, and bumped into a wooden post behind me. Carved into it were words, shallow but deliberate. Stop when told. Every stop sign on the road suddenly made sense, and I realized I hadn't been following the rules long enough. I ran back to my truck, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. The engine roared to life, louder than it should have been, echoing down the empty street like a scream. I didn't look at the buildings as I drove. I couldn't shake the feeling something was standing just behind the windows, waiting for eye contact. At the edge of town, the road split into 3 identical paths. No signs, no markings, just snow-covered asphalt disappearing into trees. My GPS spun uselessly, recalculating over and over like it was stuck in a loop. Then the radio turned on by itself again. The same tired voice whispered more clearly this time. "You didn't stop long enough." Headlights appeared behind me in the mirror, old, yellow, and far too close. The vehicle followed without gaining or losing distance, no matter how fast I went. My fear wasn't of being chased. It was the certainty that this road didn't want me to leave yet. And roads like this always get what they're owed. I chose the left road at random, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. The headlights behind me vanished the instant I turned, as if they'd never existed. That should have relieved me. Instead, it made my chest feel hollow. The road stretched on endlessly, perfectly straight, trees blurring into a black wall on either side. After 10 minutes, I passed the same stop sign again, the exact same one, bent at the same angle, half buried in snow. I knew because the reflective sticker on its pole was torn in the shape of a crescent. I slammed the brakes and stopped fully this time. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing happened. No voice, no movement. Just my own breathing fogging the windshield. When I finally drove on, the town appeared again. Identical buildings, identical lights. But something had changed. This time, there were people standing outside. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just watched the road, waiting to see if I would stop again. I rolled past them slowly, afraid that even eye contact might count as breaking another rule I didn't understand. Their faces were wrong. Not distorted, not monstrous, just empty, like expressions that had been forgotten. One of them wore a delivery jacket identical to mine. That's when I realized the truth settling in my gut, like ice. This town wasn't abandoned. It was unfinished. Each stop, each delay, each mistake added someone new. The radio whispered again, softer now, almost kind, almost paid. The road ahead narrowed until it felt like it was squeezing me forward. I thought about stopping again, about waiting it out. But fear overpowered logic. I floored it. The town screamed. Every light went out at once, plunging the road into absolute darkness. The engine stalled. Silence returned, heavier than before. When the headlights finally flickered back on, the road was gone. I was parked alone on a normal Ontario highway, dawn breaking ahead. I never deliver north anymore, and I always stop at every sign, even the ones that shouldn't exist. I told myself it was over. That explanation is what I repeated to the police officer who found me pulled over on the shoulder, engine cold, hands numb, no town anywhere on his map. He said I'd likely taken a service road used decades ago, one that no longer officially existed. People get turned around in storms all the time. I tried to believe him, but weeks later, small things started going wrong. Stop signs near my apartment seemed closer together than before. Some were newer, shinier, installed where they hadn't been yesterday. I'd catch myself slowing down even when I had the right of way, heart racing, waiting for something to happen. One night, while stopped at a perfectly normal intersection, my radio turned on by itself. No static this time, no whisper. Just my own voice, tired and distant, saying, "You didn't stop long enough." I sat there through 3 green lights, frozen, until the car behind me honked. When I finally drove on, I knew something followed me home. Not a car, a rule. I started noticing people at intersections. Not every time, just sometimes. standing a little too far back from the curb, watching the signs instead of the traffic, waiting. One evening, I saw a man in a delivery jacket, my company's old logo, standing beside a stop sign near my building. Snow fell lightly around him, though the forecast was clear. I slowed. I stopped completely. I waited. He smiled. Then he stepped back, fading into the snowfall like a reflection pulled away from glass. The street returned to normal. Cars passed. Life continued. That night, I dreamed of roads folding in on themselves, of towns built only from rules and patience and debt. I woke up knowing the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't spared. I was released. As long as I obey, as long as I stop when told, I get to keep moving. But somewhere out there, a road is waiting for me to hurry again. And this time, it won't let me leave at all. I tried to live normally after that. I really did. I changed routes, avoided late-night drives, even transferred to a desk position at work. But rules like that don't disappear just because you stop believing in them. They wait. Every so often, I'd notice gaps in my memory while driving. A missed turn I didn't remember taking. A stop sign I was sure hadn't been there before. Once, I found frost on my windshield in the middle of July, melted away before I could touch it. The worst part wasn't fear anymore. It was familiarity. I knew how long to stop. I knew when waiting felt enough. And once, just once, I saw someone else panic at an intersection. A young woman gripping her wheel, eyes wide, clearly sensing something she couldn't explain. I wanted to warn her, to tell her to wait. But the light turned green. She drove. That night, the radio whispered again, please this time. One step closer to paid. I understood then. The road doesn't just trap people, it recruits them. 679-591. I'm writing this now because I know what's coming. I can feel it the same way you feel pressure before a storm. The signs near my home are multiplying again. New ones, temporary ones. Ones wrapped in orange tape like warnings meant only for me. Last night, my GPS updated on its own. A new road appeared north of the city, unnamed, unnumbered. Just a thin gray line stretching into nothing. The radio hasn't spoken since. That silence is worse. I've realized the truth too late. The road never wanted my life. It wanted my obedience, my patience, my willingness to stop without understanding why. Soon, I'll be asked to wait longer than ever before. Maybe forever. If you ever find yourself on a road that keeps asking you to stop, listen carefully. Not to the signs, but to how long the silence lasts. Because once the waiting feels normal, you're already part of the town. And towns like that are always looking for new residents. My name is Daniel Morrison, and this happened when I was 34 years old, after I moved with my wife into what everyone in town called a perfect starter home. We had come to a small Ontario town for a fresh start. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, a place where nothing ever seemed to happen. My goal was simple: settle down, save money, start a family, and leave my past stress behind. I've always been afraid of instability, financial, emotional, any kind. This house felt solid, safe. The realtor mentioned the basement almost as an afterthought, old, unfinished, but dry. Every house on Maple Street has one, she said, smiling. The first night, while unpacking, I heard something from below. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure, like the air itself shifting under the floorboards. I asked my wife if she felt it. She laughed and said old houses make old noises. But when I went downstairs with a flashlight, I noticed something wrong immediately. The basement was larger than it should have been, much larger. I measured it the next morning. I had to. From the outside, the house was narrow, squeezed between two others like books on a shelf. But the basement stretched far beyond the footprint of the house by at least 15 feet. There were no doors leading out, no signs of extension, just more concrete, more darkness. When I asked the neighbors about it, they exchanged looks that lasted a second too long. One of them, an older man named Harold, finally said, "Basements here don't like being talked about." That should have been my warning. At night, the sounds changed. Slow footsteps, not approaching, circling, always below us. My wife stopped sleeping. She said the air felt thick, like the house was holding its breath. One evening, I found a new door in the basement. Metal, rusted, locked. I swear it hadn't been there the day before. Carved into the concrete above it were words so faint I almost missed them. "What we bury stays." I didn't open the door. Not at first. I told myself it was just an old storage room we'd somehow overlooked. Houses hide things all the time. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. The air around the door was colder, heavy enough to make my ears ring slightly, like pressure before a storm. That night, Harold knocked on our door uninvited. He never stepped inside. He just stood on the porch, eyes fixed past me, toward the basement beneath our feet. "You hear it yet?" he asked. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. They all do, eventually. Before leaving, he warned me not to dig, not to renovate, and under no circumstances to open any door that wasn't there when the house was built. His fear wasn't dramatic. It was resigned, like someone explaining gravity. After he left, I checked the basement again. The metal door was warm now, and from behind it came a soft sound. Not knocking, breathing, slow, patient, like something conserving energy. My wife wanted to leave. She packed a bag the next morning, hands shaking, saying the house felt hungry. That word stuck with me. Hungry, not haunted, not cursed, waiting to be fed. I tried to be practical. I told her we'd sell, that we'd get an inspection, that there had to be a logical explanation, but every excuse felt thinner than the last. That afternoon, while she was out, I heard the door open. Not the basement door, the metal one. A long creak echoed upward, vibrating through the floorboards. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, heart hammering, watching darkness shift below like a slow tide. Something moved inside, not stepping out, rearranging itself. I smelled damp earth and something older, like sealed rooms and forgotten hospitals. When the sound stopped, I forced myself down the stairs. The door was closed again, locked. But a new thing waited on the floor in front of it. A child's shoe, old, caked in dust. We didn't have children, but the house remembered them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt intentional, like footsteps choosing where to land. My wife lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling, whispering that she could feel something pressing upward through the mattress. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house exhaled. The sound came from below, a deep, settling groan that traveled through the walls and into my bones. I went down to the basement against my better judgment. The metal door was different now. The rust had spread outward in branching patterns, like veins. The words above it, "What we bury stays," were deeper, darker, freshly carved. I noticed something else for the first time. Tally marks etched into the wall beside the door. Dozens of them, some scratched, some carefully carved, some crossed out violently. As I counted, a memory surfaced. Harold mentioning that Maple Street never had missing persons reports. People didn't vanish here. They were accounted for. From behind the door came a whisper, low and layered, like many voices sharing one throat. We're almost full. The next morning, Maple Street held a block gathering. No flyers, no announcements. Everyone just knew. Tables appeared, food was shared. Laughter felt forced, rehearsed. I noticed how carefully everyone avoided talking about basements, foundations, renovations. Harold pulled me aside. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette he never smoked before. He told me the truth in pieces, like he couldn't risk saying it all at once. The street was built over something old, not a burial ground, not a cave, a void, a place that takes shape only when fed. Every house had a basement because the street needed many mouths, not one. And every generation, someone new moved in, someone practical enough to ignore the signs. That night, my wife was gone. Her bag still sat by the door. Her phone lay cracked on the kitchen floor. The basement door was open, and inside, the air felt satisfied. I understood then what Maple Street demanded. It didn't want belief, it wanted balance. I searched the house until my voice broke from calling her name. Every room felt wrong without her, like the walls were leaning inward to listen. When I reached the basement, the air was warmer now, damp and breathing. The metal door stood fully open, revealing a space that shouldn't exist. The concrete ended abruptly, giving way to darkness that absorbed the flashlight beam instead of reflecting it. I heard my wife's voice, not calling for help, but whispering calmly like she was trying not to wake someone. She said my name once, softly, from deep inside the dark. Harold appeared behind me without a sound. He didn't try to stop me when I stepped forward. He only said, "It takes what anchors you. That's how it keeps the street stable." I understood then why everyone stayed, why no one fought it. The void didn't need force. It needed consent shaped by love. I stepped closer to the edge. The darkness shifted, attentive. Behind me, Harold locked the basement door, not to trap me in, but to make sure I didn't change my mind. Time didn't move normally inside the basement after that. Or maybe it was just me. I remember standing there, heart pounding, realizing the truth no one had ever said aloud. Maple Street didn't sacrifice people. It traded futures. I heard whispers, memories, regrets, promises people never kept. The void wore them like clothing. It showed me versions of my life that would never happen. Children we'd planned for, holidays we'd imagined, a quiet old age that felt unbearably close. Then my wife stepped out of the darkness. She looked unharmed, calm, almost relieved. She told me the house was full, that the street would be quiet for years now. She said someone had to stay behind to keep it that way. She kissed my forehead like I was already gone. When I woke up, I was lying on the basement floor alone. The door was closed. The tally marks had one fresh line. I was no longer afraid. That scared me most of all. Weeks passed, but Maple Street didn't let go. Every creak in the floor, every sigh of wind against the windows, felt like a reminder of the debt I owed. I started noticing changes in the house, small ones at first. The basement door slightly wider than before, the air colder near the walls, shadows bending just beyond my vision. Neighbors smiled too broadly when I walked past. Their greetings felt rehearsed, practiced, as if the street itself had taught them their lines. I understood then that the house wasn't just a structure. It was a system, a living ledger of compliance. One evening, I saw a moving shadow in the basement from across the living room. I didn't rush. I didn't call for my wife. I just watched. It paused in front of the metal door, seemed to bow slightly, and then retreated into the darkness. I realized the street wasn't finished with me. It never would be. The void below remembered me, and it always will. I stopped questioning it. I stopped trying to change it. The house settled into routine, and so did I. The basement door remained closed, but I could feel it breathing. Alive, patient, waiting. Maple Street wasn't evil. It was impartial. It demanded balance, and it enforced it quietly, efficiently, without need for screams. I never spoke of it again. Not to the police, not to friends, not even to my wife. She seemed to understand the rules intuitively now. Life went on. Children played in the yards. Neighbors laughed at barbecues. The street appeared normal to anyone passing through. But I knew the truth. If anyone ever hears about Maple Street, about the basements, about the quiet that presses through the night, don't ask questions. Don't investigate. Don't linger, because the street notices. And every time it does, a tally mark is added, somewhere deep below, counting how many have learned the lesson too late. My name is Samantha Hayes, and this happened the summer I turned 26, when I took a job as a seasonal lifeguard at Black Pine Lake, a secluded body of water in northern Ontario. I had always loved isolation, but this lake felt different, like it had been waiting. My goal was simple: earn money, enjoy the sun, and spend evenings reading in the small cabin provided by the resort. The other guards were friendly enough, but something about the town whispered warnings in half-formed ways. Parents would warn their children not to swim past certain buoys. Older locals avoided the far docks after dusk. I thought it was superstition. The first week went fine. Swims, sunburn, the occasional late-night patrol. But on my third night, I noticed movement along the far shore. A figure just beyond the tree line, watching. It wasn't human. Or if it was, it didn't behave like any person I'd ever known. Its head tilted unnaturally. Its limbs jerked just slightly off rhythm. And when I looked away, I heard the water whispering my name. I tried to rationalize it. Summer heat, exhaustion, maybe my imagination running wild. But then the other guards started noticing odd things too. Lifebuoys would appear in places they hadn't been left. Footprints, wet and heavy, trailing from the lake into the forest, vanishing before anyone could follow them. One evening, my friend Lucas came running from the dock, pale, whispering about shapes in the water that moved against the current. He claimed he saw hands, too long, too thin, pressing the water upward like it was reaching. I didn't see it at first. But then, while making my rounds after dark, the shadows began to move. Not just reflections in the water, but actual distortions along the shoreline. Trees seemed to bend unnaturally. The reeds twisted even though there was no wind. I heard splashes, small at first, then deliberate. Something was entering the lake. Something that shouldn't exist. And for the first time that summer, I felt a primal fear. This lake wasn't just isolated. It was alive. That night, I stayed late on the dock, flashlight trembling in my hand, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever haunted the lake. The water was unnaturally still beyond the buoy line, black and glassy like oil. Shadows twisted beneath the surface. Then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, low in the water, fixed on me. I froze, my heart hammering. The creature didn't swim toward me. It didn't need to. The lake itself seemed to shift, waves forming without wind, circling me like a predator. My rational mind screamed, "There's a logical explanation," but my instinct screamed louder. Suddenly, the eyes vanished. Silence returned, heavier than before. My flashlight illuminated something new along the shoreline. Footprints leading into the dense forest. Wet, wide, and strangely human, yet far too long. I wanted to follow. I wanted answers. But a low rumble vibrated through the dock, like the lake itself was warning me. I ran back to the cabin, convinced the forest would swallow anyone foolish enough to linger. The next day, the town seemed normal, almost painfully so. Families picnicked, children laughed, fishermen worked the far end of the lake. But none of them mentioned what I had seen. I asked a local, a middle-aged woman named Clara, about unusual activity. She looked at me like I'd asked an impossible question. "The lake doesn't like strangers," she said softly. "It tests you before you belong." I laughed nervously. But that night, the testing began in earnest. While walking along the shore after my shift, I noticed a figure standing halfway in the water. Its body was tall, impossibly thin, limbs bent at odd angles. It didn't move forward, but its head followed me relentlessly. I stopped breathing, wishing I could disappear into the darkness. Then it waded toward the dock in perfect silence, moving just beneath the waterline, only its eyes visible. It stopped just a few feet away, tilting its head like it understood me. And then it whispered my name, a voice that didn't belong to any human. I ran back to the cabin, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the scratches on the dock, long, deep, wet, proved otherwise. I wasn't imagining it. The lake had watched me, and now it was marking its presence. I couldn't sleep. Every splash beyond the buoys sounded like deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. I tried talking to the other guards, but Lucas avoided my gaze, muttering that I shouldn't wander alone after dark. He refused to say why. That night, I stayed awake until the moon sank, flashlight clutched to my chest. At exactly 2:03 a.m., the water shimmered unnaturally, ripples forming into patterns, symbols maybe, or just the lake showing off its intelligence. Then the shadow surfaced fully. It wasn't human, but it carried a human weight. It watched, assessing me. Then it disappeared into the depths. I realized, with growing dread, that Black Pine Lake didn't just observe. It judged. And somehow, it knew my weaknesses. The next day, I refused to work the night shift. My supervisor insisted, but I claimed illness. I spent hours staring at the lake from the cabin porch, watching for any sign of movement. Nothing appeared at first. Then the buoys, usually bobbing gently, shifted slowly toward the center, forming a straight line pointing at the far tree line. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me. It wasn't just the creature anymore. It was the lake itself, alive and aware. I gathered the courage to take a small rowboat out toward the center. Every stroke felt like resistance, as if the water didn't want me there. When I reached the midpoint, I stopped. The shadow rose behind me, larger than before, bending the water unnaturally. It didn't attack, it watched. Then it spoke in a voice that was wet and deep. "Why are you here?" I realized then that the lake didn't need to kill. It needed answers. And if you failed, it claimed more than your life. The following night, I knew I couldn't avoid it. I returned to the lake, this time with a camera and recording equipment, hoping to capture proof. As I stepped onto the dock, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of wet earth and something older, almost metallic. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't. From the far shore, the shadow appeared, gliding across the water toward me. Its movements were smooth, unnatural, limbs bending in ways that should have been impossible. I froze, heart hammering, as it stopped a few feet from the dock, water dripping from long fingers that didn't belong to a human. Then it leaned closer, head tilting, and spoke. Not words exactly, but a series of whispers layered over each other, echoing in my mind. Do you belong, or will you leave? I stumbled back, my hand slipping from the railing. Something in the lake rippled violently, almost playful. I realized the creature wasn't trying to harm me. It was testing me. I sat frozen on the dock, shaking, trying to understand what it wanted. The whispers continued, echoing through the mist, pulling at my thoughts. The shadow stretched itself into shapes I couldn't comprehend, forming fleeting images of people I knew, faces twisted in fear, but always dissolving before recognition. The lake itself seemed to pulse, responding to my fear, my hesitation. I realized the truth. It wasn't just a creature. It was part of the water, the forest, the very air. It fed on tension, on panic, on the realization that some places in Ontario were older, deeper, and stranger than we could ever imagine. I heard a splash behind me, a small, deliberate sound. I dared to glance back. The far shore shimmered, and multiple pairs of glowing eyes reflected in the water, waiting, observing, patient. I had to make a choice. Leave and live with the memory, or stay and face what the lake wanted from me. And when I moved to stand, it tilted its head, like it was inviting me. I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I stepped off the dock into the shallow water, icy and impossibly still, feeling the weight of every ripple pressing against my legs. The shadow followed, sliding through the water with a fluid grace that made my stomach twist. It came closer, and I could finally see it properly. Its face was elongated, hollowed at the eyes and mouth, but somehow familiar, like a reflection of fear itself. Its voice, or whatever it was, entered my thoughts again. Do you belong here, or are you leaving? I tried to answer, but my words caught in my throat. I realized that it wasn't asking for permission. It was testing my courage, measuring my fear. Suddenly, the water rose unnaturally, lapping over my knees, then my waist. Trees along the shore bent as if alive, leaning toward me, whispering the same question. I understood then. This place doesn't forgive hesitation. I screamed, finally finding my voice, and the lake responded with silence. The shadow froze, then slowly sank beneath the surface, leaving only ripples that spread outward like fingers brushing the shore. My heart was pounding, my entire body shaking, but I knew I was still alive. Somehow, the lake had let me leave. I stumbled back to the dock, dripping wet, and never returned to Black Pine Lake after that summer. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I swear I can hear it whisper my name in running water, in rain falling over a quiet street, or even in the bathtub at home. The lake never left me. I understand now that Black Pine doesn't just inhabit the wilderness. It inhabits memory, fear, and the moments you think you're safe. It's waiting, patient, silent, watching. And one day, it might call me back. I'll know, because the shadows will be closer than I expect. My name is Ethan Parker, and this happened when I was 28, working as the night caretaker for the Red Cliff Lighthouse on the rugged northern shores of Ontario. I had taken the job seeking solitude, the kind only a lighthouse could provide. My goal was simple: maintain the light, keep logs, and enjoy the endless waves and wind crashing against cliffs. I loved structure and order, things I could control. But Red Cliff Point had a history the locals never fully admitted. Disappearances, strange lights at night, and whispers of a keeper who vanished decades ago. The first week went smoothly, the waves crashing below and the wind whistling past the tower. But on the third night, I heard footsteps on the spiral staircase, slow, deliberate. Yet no one was there. The shadows in the lamp room stretched and contorted unnaturally, as though the walls themselves were alive. Then, a faint light appeared at the top of the cliffs, far beyond the range of my lighthouse beam. It wasn't a human light, and it was coming closer. I climbed to the top of the lighthouse, flashlight in hand, trying to locate the source of the light. The wind screamed, tugging at my clothes and the beam of my flashlight. The cliffs below were jagged and wet, the waves striking like fists against the rocks. Yet, the light continued to approach, moving slowly as if it were aware I was watching. When I returned to the lantern room, I found the main light had dimmed inexplicably. The controls weren't responding. I checked every wire, every fuse. Nothing. The light outside wasn't affected by the weather, it seemed intelligent. I called the local harbor for guidance, but the line was dead. The wind carried whispers that didn't belong to the sea, words I couldn't understand, but felt like warnings. By midnight, the light had circled the cliff several times. It hovered at the edge, casting shadows that looked human, but twisted. Something, or someone, was testing me, watching my reactions, learning my patterns. The next night, I stayed alert from sunset until dawn, pacing the spiral staircase like a caged animal. Every time the light outside moved, my stomach tightened. It wasn't fast, not like a human could run. It glided, hovering, and always returned to the cliff edge, staring directly at the lighthouse. I tried to distract myself. Maintenance logs, checking the lens, inspecting the stairs. But the sense of being watched never left. By 2:30 a.m., the whispers returned, swirling with the wind. They sounded like many voices layered together, some angry, some pleading, some mournful. Finally, I gathered courage and stepped outside onto the narrow walkway. The wind nearly threw me off balance, but I spotted movement. A figure at the cliff edge, dark, human-shaped, but too tall, with limbs bending at impossible angles. Its head tilted, and I felt as though it could see into my mind. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It simply waited. I realized then that I had become part of whatever haunted Red Cliff Point. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the wind, shadows, or exhaustion. But the following night, the figure appeared again. Closer this time. Its presence radiated a cold pressure, like the air itself had weight. Inside the lighthouse, the lamp flickered violently. Tools I'd left on the workbench shifted slightly, as if nudged by invisible hands. I called out to it, daring to break the silence. The wind carried back a whisper. "Keeper. Stay." Panic surged through me, but I was too afraid to leave the tower. My mind raced with the history of previous keepers. None of them had lasted a month, according to the locals. Some vanished, some went mad, some simply walked into the storm and never returned. I realized I was being tested, not for obedience, not for survival, but to see if I belonged, or if I would break first. The light outside pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and I knew it was counting me. By the fifth night, I realized the lighthouse itself had become a trap. The spiral staircase no longer felt ordinary. Steps creaked under my feet as if resenting each movement, and shadows stretched in impossible directions, bending the light into shapes that shouldn't exist. Every gust of wind whispered my name, low and urgent, tugging at my thoughts. I decided to confront the figure at the cliff edge. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed to the top, ignoring the warning screaming in my mind. The storm had grown worse, the waves lashing violently against the rocks. Lightning illuminated the figure, tall, thin, and contorted. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if examining me like prey before a hunt. It raised an elongated arm and pointed toward the lighthouse lamp, which now pulsed with a rhythm eerily similar to a heartbeat. I realized then that the figure wasn't separate from the light. It controlled it. And whatever controlled the light could reach me anywhere inside the tower. I stayed close to the lantern room, trying to keep my distance from the cliff edge. But the light from outside seemed alive. It pulsated faster when I moved, slower when I stayed still, like it was communicating or judging. I tried speaking aloud, asking who it was, but the wind swallowed my words. Then it came closer. A shadow passed over the walkway, and I realized it didn't need to move. It could manipulate perception. The railing I trusted seemed warped, leaning toward me in impossible angles. My mind screamed, yet I couldn't move fast enough to escape the feeling of inevitability. Finally, the whisper returned, louder this time, echoing directly in my skull. Do you belong, or will you leave? The choice wasn't mine to make. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat was measured. The entity wanted compliance, submission, understanding of the lighthouse's unspoken rules. I understood then. Red Cliff Point didn't just punish, it educates. It molds the next keeper. By the seventh night, I knew hiding was futile. The storm had worsened, wind howling like a chorus of tortured souls, waves smashing violently against the cliffs. I climbed to the top again, flashlight and lantern in hand, determined to face whatever haunted Red Cliff Point. The figure stood at the edge of the cliffs, taller than before, its limbs bending impossibly, as if gravity had no meaning for it. Its head tilted in that same unsettling way, and I realized it had been waiting, watching my every movement. Lightning flashed, illuminating a series of markings along the rocks. Symbols I hadn't noticed before, faintly glowing in the dark, like a warning or perhaps a guide. The entity didn't move, but raised a long, thin arm toward me, pointing at the pulsing lamp inside the tower. A deep, layered whisper echoed through my mind. Keeper, understand your place, or the sea takes you. I shivered. The choice was mine, in name only. I stepped closer to the railing, heart hammering, knowing every move was scrutinized. The light outside pulsed faster, almost like a heartbeat syncing with mine. The shadow figure tilted its head, and in that instant, I felt an understanding. This wasn't malevolence. It was enforcement, a guardian of rules older than anyone alive. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and I heard the whispers clearly. Names, stories, failures of keepers long gone. It wanted me to acknowledge them, to respect the balance of the lighthouse and cliffs. A single misstep, and I could join the tally of lost keepers. I raised my flashlight toward the shadow, trembling, and the pulsing light responded, fading slightly, as if granting a temporary reprieve. I realized then that the lighthouse's entity wasn't simply a threat, it was a teacher. But the lessons were brutal, and mistakes came with consequences. I descended the staircase slowly, aware that every shadow now followed my movements like silent observers. On the ninth night, I knew I couldn't avoid the entity any longer. The storm had reached its peak, waves crashing over the cliffs like fists against stone. I ascended the spiral staircase with a mix of terror and resolve. Flashlight clutched tightly, heart hammering against my ribs. At the top, the shadow waited at the cliff's edge, more defined than ever, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes, if it had them, glowing faintly in the storm light. The whispers filled my mind again. Do you belong, or will you fall? I realized this wasn't a test of courage alone. It was a test of comprehension, of respect, of understanding that the lighthouse, the cliffs, the storm, they were a system, ancient and patient, and I had to prove I could navigate it without disturbing its balance. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, I felt every keeper who had failed stare at me from the shadows. Then the wind died. The waves paused, and the cliff seemed to exhale. By the final night, I understood what it wanted. I raised my lantern slowly, letting its warm glow fill the tower and push back the shadows, acknowledging the rules it had silently enforced. The entity moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, a bow of recognition rather than threat. The storm subsided, leaving only the crashing of distant waves. The lighthouse light pulsed gently, steady, as if affirming my survival. I had passed the trial, not because I was fearless, but because I had learned the rhythm of the place, the balance it demanded, and respected it. I left the cliffs at dawn, exhausted but alive. Yet I carry the memory of the shadow with me. Sometimes, in storms far from Red Cliff Point, I feel its gaze. It waits, patient, judging. And I know one day it may call me back. The lighthouse doesn't forget, and neither do I. My name is Derek Lawson, and this happened the summer I moved to Hollow Creek, a tiny town in northern Ontario, seeking quiet and solitude. I wanted a simple life, small-town job, a rented cabin, and long walks along the creek. But Hollow Creek had secrets, hidden behind smiling neighbors and quaint streets lined with century-old houses. It started slowly. I noticed empty homes with fresh mail piling up, and when I asked around, locals gave vague answers. People vanished, they said, but not suddenly. Disappearances were gradual, whispered as if speaking too loudly might summon attention. One night, while walking home from the general store, I saw someone standing at the end of my street. A tall figure, partially cloaked in shadow, just staring. When I waved, it didn't move, didn't blink. Then it simply vanished into the night, leaving no trace. That was when I realized Hollow Creek wasn't just a town. It was a place that took notice. And sometimes it took people. Over the next week, I tried to blend in, pretending to be unaware of the strange occurrences. But Hollow Creek made that impossible. I noticed patterns. Houses with missing residents had doors slightly ajar, curtains swaying when no wind existed, and lights flickering at precise intervals. One evening, my neighbor Mrs. Callahan approached me, her expression tense. She whispered, "If you notice the figures, don't follow them." She paused, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "They're not human." That night, I stayed up, watching the street from my window. At exactly 11:03 p.m., a faint glow appeared at the far end of the creek, followed by a line of figures moving silently between the houses. Their shapes were human-like, but their movements were jerky, unnatural, almost mechanical. I realized then that Hollow Creek itself had rules, and the town's missing residents were consequences of failing to obey them. I wasn't safe, not even in my own home. By the third night, I could no longer pretend Hollow Creek was normal. The figures appeared again, moving silently between houses. But this time, one paused directly in front of my cabin. Its shape was indistinct, humanoid but blurred, as if the air around it refused to define it properly. I froze, breath shallow, heart hammering. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. Then it tilted its head in that same unnatural way the figures always did, as if judging me. A faint, whispering chorus echoed in my mind, a blend of voices from people who had vanished, warning me, pleading, or mocking. Desperate, I grabbed my coat and flashlight, trying to chase it down the street. The figure moved effortlessly, disappearing behind houses, yet always reappearing further down the road. I realized Hollow Creek itself was bending reality around them, guiding, shaping, protecting its secrets. I understood then that the town wasn't haunted. It was alive. The next day, I tried to speak to the locals, but everyone seemed to avoid my eyes. The few I did confront gave vague smiles, their voices almost too soft to hear. Even Mrs. Callahan, usually so cautious, refused to speak beyond a warning. You can't fight it. You can only survive it. That night, I decided to stay inside, hoping the town would leave me alone. But at precisely 11:03 p.m., the glowing figures returned. This time, they weren't outside. They were reflected in my windows, dozens of them, surrounding my cabin without a sound. One leaned forward, and for a moment, I could see what it wanted. Recognition, understanding, submission. I felt a shiver down my spine as I realized that Hollow Creek didn't just take residents. It judged them, tested them, and punished those who failed. I could no longer leave. Not yet. The town had marked me. By the fifth night, the figures became bolder. They moved into the streets with purpose, lining the sidewalks silently, their glowing eyes fixed on me. Every instinct screamed to hide, but I couldn't. I had to understand what Hollow Creek wanted. I stepped outside, flashlight shaking in my hand, and immediately felt the oppressive weight of the town pressing in. The figures didn't advance, but their presence was suffocating, bending the shadows and the mist around them. One figure drifted closer, tilting its head in that same unsettling way, observing my every move. I noticed the pattern. Each house they passed had a small mark, etched into the wood or stone, barely visible in the darkness. A symbol of judgment. I realized that the town itself was orchestrating these vanishings, ensuring that residents who failed to understand its rules simply disappeared. I had become part of their assessment, measured and weighed. One misstep, one faltering thought, and I could join the missing. I tried to move, slowly, deliberately, keeping my flashlight low. The figures mirrored my movements, their jerky, unnatural steps unnerving me to the core. Every breath I took seemed amplified, echoing off the empty streets. The town itself felt alive, bending reality, shaping the night to control my perception. At the far end of the street, I noticed one figure separate from the others. It floated slightly above the ground, taller and more defined, as if it were the leader. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, piercing into my thoughts, assessing whether I would comply or resist. Then, a soft whisper, layered, multi-toned, almost musical, filled my ears. Understand or vanish? I realized that Hollow Creek didn't just remove people randomly. It selected them based on understanding, fear, and respect for the rules no one dared to speak aloud. I knew then that survival depended not on escape, but on comprehension. By the seventh night, I knew Hollow Creek wouldn't let me observe from a distance any longer. The figures emerged from the mist, lining every street and alley, glowing eyes fixed on me like sentinels. My pulse raced, my hands trembling as I gripped the flashlight. I forced myself to step toward the leader, the taller figure floating slightly above the ground. Its head tilted, and I felt its awareness probing my mind, searching for weaknesses, for fear I couldn't hide. The whispers grew louder, now forming broken phrases I could almost understand. Belong, obey, fail. Desperate, I spoke aloud. promising to respect the town, to follow its unspoken rules. The figures paused. The leader descended slowly, the glowing eyes dimming, as if it were considering my words. Hollow Creek didn't act out of cruelty. It acted out of principle, ancient, precise, unforgiving. I realized that one misstep could erase me, just as it had countless others over the decades. The air grew heavier as I continued forward, each step measured, careful. The town itself pressing against me like invisible hands. The leader extended a thin arm, pointing toward my cabin. I realized it wanted me to confront the source of the town's energy, the central house at the creek's edge, long abandoned and surrounded by ominous marks. I approached cautiously. The whispers followed, now a chorus of voices from people long vanished, warning, guiding, judging. The figures parted slightly, creating a narrow path as if permitting me access, but reminding me that any wrong move would be fatal. The leader hovered just beyond the doorway, head tilting again, observing my intentions. I felt a terrifying clarity. Hollow Creek wasn't a place of random vanishings. It was a living entity, maintaining order through fear, patience, and discipline. And now, it was testing me directly. One wrong action could make me the next permanent resident of Hollow Creek. On the 9th night, I stepped cautiously toward the abandoned house, my flashlight cutting through the thick mist. The figures flanked me silently, glowing eyes reflecting off windows and walls. The leader floated just ahead, guiding without touching, tilting its head as if measuring my intent. Inside, the house smelled of decay and old smoke. Faded symbols were etched into the walls and floorboards, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the whispers that filled my mind. I realized this was the heart of Hollow Creek's power, the place where decisions were made about who vanished and who remained. The whispers formed words I could barely comprehend. Do you belong? Or will you fail? My voice trembled as I answered aloud, promising to respect the town, to obey its rules, to never stray. The pulsing of the symbols slowed, the figures outside quieted, and the oppressive weight of the town lifted slightly. I understood then. Survival in Hollow Creek wasn't about strength. It was about recognition and respect. By the 10th night, I had earned a fragile understanding of Hollow Creek. The figures no longer followed aggressively, and the leader hovered silently by the house, eyes glowing faintly, but without threat. I realized I had been tested, measured, and found capable of comprehension rather than fear. I left the house at dawn, the mist curling around my feet, the whispers fading into distant echoes. Hollow Creek had marked me, yes, but it had spared me, granting a rare chance at survival. Even now, months later, I cannot forget the glowing figures, the whispers, or the oppressive presence of the town. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I think I hear the pulse of Hollow Creek in the wind, a subtle reminder that it watches, judges, and waits for those who fail to understand. I survived, but I am never truly free. Hollow Creek never forgets. And one day, it may call me back. My name is Clara Mitchell, and this happened the summer I volunteered to catalog old records at Maplewood Asylum, a long-abandoned psychiatric facility on the outskirts of Ontario. I had always been drawn to history, the kind buried in dusty files and forgotten buildings, never expecting that some histories are alive, hungry and angry. The asylum had a reputation. Patients who vanished without records, nurses who swore the walls whispered at night, doctors who disappeared mysteriously. Locals called it cursed, but I was skeptical. Curiosity outweighed fear. The first night, I entered the main ward with only a flashlight and a clipboard. Dust swirled in the beam, and the air was thick with mildew and something else. Something I couldn't name. I heard faint whispers echoing through the halls, almost like conversations from a distance. But no one was there. The walls seemed to pulse with the sounds of distant footsteps. I realized Maplewood wasn't empty. It was waiting. And it had remembered me. The second night, I returned with a notebook, determined to document what I saw. The main ward was colder than before, and the whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words I couldn't understand. As I explored, I noticed marks on the walls, scratches in patterns, almost like someone had been trying to communicate, desperate to be heard. Doors that should have been locked creaked open, revealing rooms that weren't on the floor plan. I heard footsteps above me, slow and deliberate, echoing on the second-floor tiles. I called out, but my voice disappeared into the walls, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Then I saw it. A shadow at the end of the corridor, tall and distorted, flickering in and out of existence like a broken reflection. It didn't move toward me. It simply observed, as if weighing my intentions, judging whether I belonged in Maplewood. I realized I had crossed a threshold. The asylum was no longer just a building. It was a presence. By the third night, Maplewood Asylum made its presence undeniable. I was cataloging patient records in the East Wing when the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the dim flashlight beam. The whispers became coherent, echoing across the hallways. Faint pleas, cries of anger, fragmented sentences that made no sense yet filled me with dread. I felt watched. Every corner seemed to twitch with movement, shadows stretching unnaturally, twisting as if alive. One of the old patient rooms, previously empty, now contained a rocking chair moving slowly on its own. The floor creaked beneath invisible weight, and I could hear a soft, deliberate dragging sound. Furniture being pulled, or perhaps something unseen walking. As I stepped closer to investigate, the shadow appeared again, taller, darker, and more defined. It tilted its head in that same disturbing way, assessing me. I realized then that Maplewood didn't want me to explore. It wanted acknowledgement, recognition of the lives it had claimed. And it wanted me to understand my place within its walls. By the fourth night, the asylum became relentless. Doors slammed shut behind me, echoing through the empty halls. The whispers grew urgent, layering into a chorus of accusing voices. I could feel the walls closing in, the very structure seeming to pulse with malevolent intelligence. I tried to leave, but the corridors had shifted, impossible angles and hallways I had never seen before. The asylum had become a maze, responding to my movements, herding me toward the deeper wards. In one room, old patient files floated off shelves, spinning in the air as if guided by invisible hands. And then the shadow appeared directly in front of me, taller than before, almost filling the doorway. Its head tilted unnaturally, eyes faintly glowing, and I could feel a pressure in my chest, an unspoken demand. Acknowledge us, or be lost. I realized I was no longer an observer. I was a participant in Maplewood's dark history. By the fifth night, Maplewood Asylum's presence was suffocating. Every room I entered seemed alive, the walls whispering secrets and voices I almost recognized. Patients, nurses, doctors, all trapped within its confines. Footsteps echoed behind me, slow and deliberate. Yet when I turned, nothing was there. I tried to focus on my work, sorting old patient records, but the shadows moved of their own accord. Faint figures flickered in corners, vanishing whenever I blinked. One shadow lingered longer, taller and darker, its head tilted unnaturally, as if observing my very thoughts. Then the whispers grew into commands. See. Remember, obey. The pressure in the room intensified, and I felt my will being tested. Maplewood wasn't content with my presence. It demanded understanding, acknowledgement of the lives lost within its walls. I realized the asylum wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, and it had chosen me as its latest witness. That night, I ventured into the treatment wing, a place I had avoided before. The air was colder, heavier, carrying the metallic scent of old medicine and rust. Every step echoed unnaturally, stretching the sound into a low, resonant hum. I found a room with overturned chairs and shattered glass, and in the center stood the tall shadow, arms elongated, eyes glowing faintly. It tilted its head, and I felt its gaze pierce into my mind. The whispers grew louder, layered with sorrow, anger, and warning. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a child crying, a patient long gone. The shadow pointed toward the far wall, where a hidden doorway appeared, previously unseen. My heart pounded as I realized Maplewood was leading me, forcing me to witness its secrets. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was showing me the truth. And the truth was far darker than I could imagine. By the seventh night, I had no doubt. Maplewood Asylum was alive, and it was aware of me. Every corridor shifted subtly, walls bending in impossible angles, ceilings stretching higher than they should. The shadow followed me relentlessly, taller and darker than before, tilting its head as if assessing my resolve. I stepped into the treatment room the shadow had revealed. The air shimmered unnaturally, faint, whispering voices layering over one another, forming a chorus of long-dead patients pleading for acknowledgement. The floorboards groaned beneath invisible weight, and I could feel something moving just beyond my vision, stalking, observing. Then I saw a series of symbols etched into the wall, faintly glowing in the dim light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The shadow pointed toward them, and I realized these were more than markings. They were instructions, rules, warnings, lessons left by the asylum's unseen caretakers. Maplewood wasn't simply haunted. It was a living entity, and I was now a part of its judgment. I followed the shadow's guidance deeper into the asylum, each step deliberate, knowing any mistake could trap me forever. The whispers became clearer, voices recounting the horrors endured by patients and staff alike. Tales of neglect, suffering, and cruel experiments. The shadows of the past seemed to swirl around me, their presence almost tangible. At the end of a long hallway, the shadow paused beside a rusted wheelchair, motionless yet commanding attention. I could feel a pulse emanating from the walls themselves, a rhythm that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. The asylum was alive, breathing through the floorboards, walls, and ceilings. The shadow tilted its head again, almost expectantly. I understood then that Maplewood was not malevolent. It demanded recognition, understanding, and respect. Survival depended not on fear, but on comprehension, on acknowledging the lives and suffering within these walls without disturbing their echoes. I had passed the first test, but the asylum's final judgment awaited. By the 9th night, the asylum's presence was overwhelming. Every hallway pulsed with life, whispers louder, clearer, echoing the stories of patients and staff long gone. The shadow guided me to the central ward, the heart of Maplewood, where the worst suffering had occurred. The room was vast, walls lined with rusted beds and peeling paint. Symbols glowed faintly on every surface, and the whispers formed a coherent chant. Remember, respect, survive. The shadow hovered just above the floor, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly. I realized it had brought me here to witness the full weight of Maplewood's history. As I stepped closer to the center of the room, I felt a crushing pressure in my chest, a test of will and comprehension. The shadow moved slightly, tilting its head again, signaling that survival depended on acknowledging the asylum's dark truth and the lives consumed within its walls. Maplewood was alive, and I was part of its memory now. On the 10th night, I understood the asylum's final lesson. The shadow moved aside slightly, and the symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, their rhythm syncing with my own heartbeat. The whispers were no longer threatening. They were instructive, guiding me to recognize the suffering, the failures, and the forgotten lives that Maplewood had consumed. I left the central ward slowly, absorbing every detail, acknowledging every echo and shadow. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadow hovered silently at the doorway. A final nod of acknowledgement. Maplewood had tested me, judged me, and allowed me to survive. Even now, years later, I can feel the asylum's presence in quiet moments, a subtle pulse in the air, a whisper in the wind. Maplewood is alive, and it never forgets. I survived. But the memories, the whispers, and the shadow remain with me always. My name is Ethan Crowley, and this happened the summer I took a job as a forest ranger in Blackwood Forest, a dense, isolated woodland in Ontario. I thought it would be peaceful work, patrolling trails, checking cabins, and enjoying the solitude of the trees. But Blackwood had its own rules, and I was about to learn them the hard way. The first night, while on patrol, I noticed something strange. Faint lights flickering between the trees, distant but deliberate, moving slowly, almost like lanterns. At first, I assumed they were hikers or campers, but the forest was nearly empty. I felt watched, not by animals, not by humans, but by something else entirely. Then I saw them, silhouettes standing motionless among the trees, tall, thin, unblinking, and silent. They didn't move as I approached, but they never left my line of sight either. Blackwood Forest wasn't just a forest, it was being observed. By the second night, I began noticing patterns. The figures appeared at the same spots along the trails, always at the edge of my vision, always silent. Any attempt to approach them caused them to vanish, only to reappear moments later elsewhere, as if the forest itself was guiding them. The wind carried faint whispers, unintelligible at first, but growing into low murmurs that made my skin crawl. Even my radio picked up strange static patterns, almost like voices mimicking my own words. I decided to follow one of the figures cautiously. It led me deeper into the forest than I had ever been, to an area I didn't recognize. The trees grew closer together, branches twisting overhead, creating dark tunnels. The figure paused, head tilted unnaturally, waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. I realized then that Blackwood Forest wasn't haunted. It was alive, and I was being studied. By the third night, Blackwood Forest no longer felt neutral. The silence had weight, pressing against my ears till every snap of a twig felt deliberate. As I patrolled deeper trails, I realized the forest had changed. Paths I knew well seemed longer, curves sharper, landmarks subtly misplaced. The watchers appeared again, 3 this time, standing between the trees, evenly spaced, perfectly still. Their shapes were tall and thin, proportions slightly wrong, as if they were copying the idea of a human rather than being one. When my flashlight passed over them, the light dimmed, struggling as though swallowed by the dark. I heard whispers then, not from one direction, but everywhere at once. They weren't words yet, more like breath shaped into intention. The watchers tilted their heads in unison. I felt a surge of panic and backed away, but the forest didn't allow retreat. The trees creaked, branches shifting, guiding me forward. That was the moment I understood. Blackwood wasn't showing itself to me. It was positioning me. The fourth night was when the watchers tested me. I found one standing directly on the trail, closer than ever before. It didn't disappear when I stopped. It didn't retreat when I spoke. It simply stood there, head tilted, waiting. My radio crackled to life, repeating my own breathing back to me with a slight delay. The forest responded. Leaves rustled in rhythm, trees groaning softly like they were listening. I realized the watchers weren't scouts. They were judges. As I stepped closer, the figure raised its arms slowly and pointed deeper into the forest, toward an area marked off limits on every ranger map. My instincts screamed to turn back, but curiosity pulled harder. The watchers behind me shifted silently, closing the distance just enough to remind me I was no longer in control. I understood then that Blackwood Forest didn't attack intruders. It observed them, measured them, and decided whether they were allowed to leave. By the fifth night, I crossed into the restricted zone the watchers had indicated. The forest here felt older, heavier, as if time itself slowed beneath the canopy. My footsteps sounded muted, swallowed by moss and thick roots twisting across the ground like veins. The air smelled damp and metallic, carrying a tension that made my skin prickle. The watchers followed at a distance, never rushing, never falling behind. I could sense them without turning, silent shapes gliding between trees, always just outside the beam of my flashlight. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of their faces, if they could be called that. Smooth, featureless shapes with faint indentations where eyes should be. The whispers returned, clearer now. Not voices, but thoughts pressing against my own. Observe. Remain still. Do not interfere. I realized then that the watchers were bound to this place. They weren't predators. They were custodians. And by stepping into this zone, I had interrupted something ancient and deliberate. Blackwood Forest wasn't hiding its secret anymore. It was showing me my mistake. The sixth night brought me to a clearing I had never seen marked on any map. The trees formed a perfect circle, their trunks bent inward like spectators. In the center stood a ring of standing stones, each etched with symbols worn smooth by time. The air hummed softly, vibrating through my chest. The watchers gathered at the edge of the clearing, evenly spaced, heads tilted in identical angles. One stepped forward, taller than the rest. And for the first time, I felt direct pressure in my mind, not hostile, but commanding. Images flooded my thoughts. Animals frozen mid-step, lost hikers standing motionless for days, rangers before me who had come too close. I understood now. The watchers preserved balance. Anything that disrupted the forest's rhythm was stopped, held, or removed. The tall watcher gestured toward the stones. The message was clear. I wasn't being hunted. I was being evaluated. And Blackwood Forest was deciding whether I would remain human or become part of the silence. By the seventh night, I no longer felt like a ranger. I felt like a trespasser standing before something ancient and patient. The tall watcher moved closer to the stone circle, and the air thickened until breathing felt deliberate, forced. The other watchers remained perfectly still, their attention fixed entirely on me. The symbols on the standing stones began to glow faintly, pulsing in a slow rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I realized the forest was synchronizing with me, measuring my fear, my intent, my resistance. Images flooded my mind. Animals frozen mid-motion, people standing motionless among the trees, eyes open but empty. They weren't dead. They were paused, preserved. The tall watcher extended its arm toward the stones, and I understood the unspoken choice. I could submit, become part of the forest's balance, or I could resist and be erased entirely. I fell to my knees, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. I spoke aloud, promising never to interfere, never to expose what lived here. The forest listened. The 8th night passed differently. The watchers no longer followed at a distance. They stood farther back, observing without pressure, as if the decision had already been made. The forest felt calmer, though no less unsettling. I noticed changes in myself. Sounds carried farther. Shadows moved slower. I could sense disturbances in the forest before they happened. A snapped branch miles away, a startled animal before it fled. Blackwood had marked me, altered my perception just enough to bind me to it. The tall watcher appeared one final time near my cabin. It stood beneath the trees, barely visible, head tilted in what I now recognized as acknowledgement rather than threat. The message came clearly, without words. You may leave, but you will carry this place with you. I understood then that the watchers weren't monsters. They were limits, boundaries given form, and I had come dangerously close to crossing a line no human was meant to see. Blackwood Forest had spared me, but it had not released me. I left Blackwood Forest a week later. My resignation letter was brief, unreadable even to myself. No one questioned it. No one ever does when someone leaves that place abruptly. But the forest didn't stay behind. Sometimes, while driving at night, I see silhouettes standing just beyond the tree line, perfectly still, watching as my headlights pass. My radio still picks up static that mimics my breathing. The whispers return in moments of silence, reminding me that observation goes both ways. I searched online for reports, missing persons, old ranger logs. Many ended the same way: resignations, sudden relocations, people who never spoke about Blackwood again. Some never left at all. I realized then that the watchers don't just guard the forest. They guard secrecy. Anyone who learns the truth becomes part of the system, willingly or not. I was allowed to leave because I accepted the rules. Others weren't so fortunate. Blackwood Forest doesn't chase you. It simply waits for you to remember. Even now, years later, I still dream of the stone circle. In the dreams, I'm standing perfectly still while the forest grows around me. Roots curling over my boots, branches closing overhead. The watchers stand nearby, silent and patient, waiting for something to change. Sometimes I wake with dirt under my fingernails. Sometimes my shoes are damp, smelling of moss and pine. I don't remember leaving my house. That's when I understand the final truth. Blackwood Forest didn't just evaluate me. It claimed a part of me, a tether, invisible but unbreakable. I was allowed to live my life, but only on the condition that I remain available. Watching, listening, remembering. If you ever walk through Blackwood Forest and feel the sudden urge to stop, if the woods fall silent and you sense eyes on your back, don't turn around. Don't follow the lights. Because the watchers are not deciding if you belong. They're deciding when.